Kate Milvalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. We're continuing our Saturday book. This is truly video number 15 of The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan. And today we're doing number 14, which I just finished. So you'll want to go back. There's a lot of videos. We've been doing this for several weekends now. This is a very long book. It's close to 800 pages. So I hope you're enjoying it because it is taking quite a long time to get through. And I'm a bit ahead of what I'm talking about today. And all I can tell you is this story gets absolutely unbelievable. I won't tell you the phrase I usually use talking about it with my family. It is mind-blowing. So, just that little tidbit. Video number 15, we're starting chapter 41, Marilyn's romance with RFK hinted at. Now, for the sake of legalities, this is from the book. I'm quoting from the book. This is allegedly, I'll be using coded names for people. I think you'll be able to figure out who I'm talking about. Just given current events, I think discretion is wise. Okay, August 3rd. Now we're on the next day. August 3rd, 1962. Dorothy Kilgallen did another column about Marilyn Monroe. Said she was looking good in a skin-tight dress, that she had sex appeal to a guy, hint, hint, bigger than Joe DiMaggio. Later, she said that the Attorney General had received anonymous photos from Cal Neva. This is all gossip. The older brother, now this is true, and I thought this was really interesting. The older brother was a speed reader, could do 2,500 words a minute, which is 10 times faster than the normal person. That's just astounding. But he also had a reputation for reading rags, you know, gossip magazines and movie magazines, and not government stuff, not political stuff, which is astounding, despite like a golden education. A day before Dorothy Kilgallen wrote this, Earl Wilson, the other journalist who followed Marilyn, hinted that Marilyn went on a date with a nationally famous gent. So this was a powder keg, this gossip. This was really a disaster for Marilyn because this put her in the spotlight. It linked her with people who didn't want to be linked with, and it could have been, well, we know how it ended. This began a guessing game for everybody. Oh, who are they talking about? Dorothy Kilgallen planted the seed earlier with reports of Marilyn and the AG dancing 5 times after the show at Madison Garden, where she sang happy birthday to the older brother. Did the older brother tell his brother while in California, go talk to Marilyn? Shut her up? I don't know. The philandering of the brothers was public. It was a mad scramble to contain the damage they did. They were reckless and they're public about it. There was a lot of money and pressure put on people, even threats of deportation put on people to shut them up. This was a problem for Sinatra. He saw that Marilyn was being used as a pawn. He abhorred the brothers, especially the younger one. And he was stuck in the middle because he needed to appease Giancana. And there was the whole ownership of the lodge. Old Joe was a silent partner. Sinatra and for a short period of time, Dean Martin were the frontmen for that. I mean, this is a mess. He needed to appease Giancana, and he was worried that the connection between the brothers and the mob, that there was this warning floating around that we can get dirt on you to the brothers. We can get dirt on you. And, you know, Sinatra was kind of put in the middle of being, helping to collect that dirt. I'm trying to be careful what I say. She was a threat to these brothers suddenly, because now with all the spy equipment that was recording every word everybody said, people knew that there's some kind of plot to blackmail them using her. So she's a danger. She reached out to George Barris, the photographer from the beach, and he told two different stories. So the first story, August 3rd of 62, which was a Friday at 5:30 in New York City, she called him to talk about the book they were doing together. They were doing a photographic book together. And she told him that Jack Benny wanted to do a show with her in Vegas, and she was very excited about it. She had film offers from Sinatra wanted to do a film with her, Brando wanted to do a film with her, Gene Kelly was going to do a film with her. She had a producer reach out to her and offer her a starring role on Broadway, not Strasberg's real producers. And she was resuming the movie with Dean Martin. She was reading a book. In the middle of it, they talked about this, reading a book based on the life of Greenson. It was a fictionalized version. Isn't that interesting? She was also partway through To Kill a Mockingbird. And George Barris said she just never seemed happier. She had it all going on. But then he tells this other story, same day, same time. But when she called him, she urgently begged him to return to Los Angeles because she had important things to tell him she didn't want to talk about on the phone. Both of these stories could be partially true. He said he was sad because he couldn't come until Monday. And Marilyn really didn't want to discuss it on the phone, but he couldn't get away from whatever his commitment was. He didn't tell the second story until later. Like, the first story was, it was great, she was happy, this was all going on, but he neglected to mention she wanted him to come back. So why did he change that part of the story? Why did he add that part to the story? Was it for the dramatic effect, or was he finally revealing it? He said that something I'll always regret, not going back to LA. She called and left a message for Rupert Allen, but he was too ill to respond. He was dying, so. She didn't call anybody to set a press conference to make big revelations. She wanted advice, and she didn't trust Pat Newcomb. She was going to fire her, and she did end up firing her within this time frame, and Pat tried to stop it. You know, Pat was like resistant to it. Greenson's specialty was publicity. You know, he loved the publicity. She made a call to Henry Rosenfeld, and he was one of the last to talk with her. He was the one who was supposed to go with her to the Kennedy Center opening of Mr. President by Irving Berlin. And mostly she called, he said, to rant about Newcomb. She was trying to fire her. George, she wanted to have replace Newcomb. She thought it would be a good choice. For one thing, she trusted him. George Barris, she trusted him. That Friday evening, they talked for 32 minutes, she did, with her friend, the poet Norman Roston. We've mentioned him before. All he would say about it was she was excited and enthusiastic about rewriting the script and returning to New York City. She called Newcomb and claimed that she had bronchitis. Pat Newcomb claimed she had bronchitis, and Marilyn invited her for the weekend. And this story is coming from Pat Newcomb. And people think this is not likely because Marilyn was susceptible to catching things, and she would not have wanted somebody sick in her house. But the claim that Pat made was that she had bronchitis. Marilyn insisted she come stay at Marilyn's house for the weekend. And others said that they talked to Pat. She had no symptoms of anything. So this story is a lie. It's a weird lie. Why would she lie? These people lie about everything. It's unbelievable. Is she trying to cover up the fact that Marilyn invited her over to fire her. This is the most likely story. Eunice Murray later said that Marilyn was deeply disturbed by these columns in the newspaper that were linking her with the brothers. She had a 7 p.m. delivery of food for the Sunday barbecue with Thompson. Patricia Newcomb claimed that she and Marilyn went out to dinner. And so the question is, okay, you went out to dinner, but you were too sick with bronchitis that Marilyn Monroe had to nurse you. I mean, inconsistencies. Some want to say that they went out and ate with Lawford, and that Marilyn wanted to gossip. Others talk about a Friday night dinner party. There's these stories circulating, so we have to look at them. Milton and Amy Green were at a dinner party Friday night with the heiress Alicia Corning Clark, and she said something to the Greens and to Marlena Dietrich while she was drunk. She said, Amy recalled, she said to me, "How's your friend Marilyn? She's going to die soon. She's going to commit suicide." Was that a prophetic remark, or did she just have inside knowledge? What was this weird drunken comment about? Pages are stuck together. Friday in the daytime, this is before this dinner party where this drunken woman made that weird statement. The AG and Ethel and 4 children went to LA to the ranch of attorney Bates in Gilroy, about 80 miles south of San Francisco. And it's absolutely true because there's photographs taken by fans or somebody, journalists, at the airport. But the older brother's official documents show that he flew to Massachusetts. The older brother flew to Massachusetts and then Hyannisport to join the AG to visit their father. Was this a cover story for what they were really up to? They're each other's alibi, basically, and the father couldn't talk, so that didn't matter. Were they each other's alibi? His office diary, the big guy, his office diary says that he flew to the West Coast. I'm sorry, the AG. He flew to the West Coast with Ethel and the kids. Photos taken at the ranch show that he was there, but he's said to have left and been at Marilyn's at 4 p.m. The family left San Francisco after lunch on Sunday, so he had time. He had time from the arrival there till the next day at lunchtime. The airport, from that airport, south of San Francisco, is only 15 miles from the ranch, and the flight to LA is 47 minutes, so it's doable. A hotel telephone operator in San Francisco claims that Marilyn Monroe called the AG on Friday night at the hotel. But she wasn't obsessed with him. What she called for was she was concerned about the gossip and had to end the speculation. So did they go out for dinner to talk about the gossip? She didn't go out to gossip. She went to be upset about what was being said about her. So now we're on chapter 42, the countdown. Her career was not at an end. We've established that. Saturday, August 4th, 1962, the Chicago Tribune did an article about an offer she got paying $55,000 from Vegas, which would be $510,624 for 1 week. $500,000 for 1 week to appear in Vegas. Norman Jeffries, we've heard that name before. This is Murray's son-in-law, and he was Marilyn's handyman. He came in around 8 o'clock, 8:30 on Saturday morning to her house to tile, and there's proof. There's a check written to him by her, signed by her ahead of time for doing this work. He was there. Lots of people saw him. She was expecting a gardening delivery from the nursery, and she asked the delivery people, check with Jeffries when you get here. If there's nobody else here, he'll be here. He was a regular paid part of her staff. There's also a checkmate for the week of August 11th already made out ahead of time because she was going to be gone. She was going to be, in New York. And he was never interviewed by the police after her death. And I'm telling you this story, I'd never heard it before. It's wild. It's unreal. And just be sure to come back for the next little bit. Newcomb and Lawford were never interviewed by the police. It's insane. And Newcomb saw Marilyn before her death in her house early Sunday. She was filmed. This is after her death. She was there before her death and she was there after her death. Draw your own inference. She's on film, TV, news media stuff there. Jeffries didn't want publicity. He avoided all of the publicity. But in 1983, he still didn't want to be interviewed. And the question is, what was he afraid of? Was he afraid of repercussions? He wasn't anybody. He was just a guy. In 93, near his death, he described her death as the worst day of his life. He arrived Saturday morning. He was going to do the tiling. Marilyn got up and had juice, and he thought she looked unwell. And the photographer, Schiller, dropped by. She was supposed to be doing some kind of photography thing. She was out in the back planting, and she didn't want to talk business. I guess he had an agenda that she didn't know about. And so he shows up, and she's like, I'm in the yard. I don't want to be bothered. She seemed kind of impatient. He came about pictures and a photograph deal for Playboy. That's right, I'd forgotten about that. He wanted to talk to her about this photo shoot for Playboy. The night before, Marilyn told Pat Newcomb she wasn't going to do it. On Saturday morning, she was annoyed because she found out Pat told him to come. That Marilyn said she's not going to do it, and that's why he came by. And Marilyn was annoyed because Pat was not authorized to call this guy on her behalf. She wasn't ready to tell him yet. Marilyn told him that she hadn't made up her mind, but she didn't want to get publicity that involved nudity. She was done with that. She briefly showed him her yard and her guest house. Her dog was asleep in the guest house, and then he left. Ralph Roberts arrived. The police report that was written in 1980, so there was a re-investigation. And in 1980, this said that he phoned. That's not true. He didn't phone. He came over. He was physically there. He gave her a massage at 9 o'clock till 10:15. And he said she was in wonderful shape. She wasn't all dissipated. She wasn't tense. She wasn't depressed. She wasn't angry. She was excited about her house. She was engaged in the yard, in the garden, the house, everything. And told him it feels good to laugh again. He said there were no pills lying around. She didn't seem to be taking pills. She seemed absolutely fine. But then he ran into Eunice in the house. He used to avoid her. He used to come over after Eunice went home. He said she made her presence known, and she looked at me with such hatred and venom, as if she were saying, I thought we'd gotten rid of you. It was chilling how intimidating this little woman could be, how manipulative of Marilyn, and divisive with Marilyn's friends. Mrs. Murray was Greenson's minion. That's all. His on-the-spot representative. He was delighted to learn that Marilyn had made up her mind to discharge Mrs. Murray that day. She was firing her that day. She got a call from Thompson, who was scheduled to come on Sunday, and he was canceling, and then they rescheduled for Tuesday. Pat Newcomb was staying over. She was sleeping over, and she then woke up and had a big fight with Marilyn, and what's his name? The handyman, Jeffries, wouldn't say why. Nobody knows particularly why. Dean Martin's wife, said that Pat was deeply in love with the AG, and it took her many years to get over it. Pat admitted that she saw him shortly before Marilyn died, that she had dinner with him. That was when he came to LA. Was the fight because Marilyn knew she'd been seeing the AG behind Marilyn's back? That's very possible. I mean, it's as likely as anything else, I guess. Pat was close to Marilyn. Marilyn lavished her with gifts. She was her confidant. Kind of the sense of betrayal in this relationship. Marilyn called her Sybil, like they were sibling rivalry. But she did grow to distrust her. Pat said Marilyn could be quite mean to her. Well, if they're sisters. Pat and Marilyn Monroe had their ups and downs. Was Newcomb obsessed with Marilyn is the big question. Eunice made her an omelet, and Pat Newcomb an omelet, and Newcomb was supposed to be leaving, and the impression was she'd been fired, but she hung around anyway. And Marilyn was getting things done in the house. Now there's this myth. This is totally a myth that Marilyn, she'd been given, this is true, she'd been given a stuffed tiger from Jean Carmen. And that supposedly it said, Bobby loves me, not you. You're old, fat, and ugly. But Anthony Summers, the writer, he repeated this, but Marilyn had bought the tiger herself. It was a dog toy. So this myth grew up around this dog toy that was found at the house after she died, that it had been like a poison pen letter, kind of, you know, it came with a note that said, you're fat and ugly and I hate you and he loves me and he doesn't love you. And it's all nonsense. It's been repeated in books, but it's nonsense. Marilyn bought this little stuffed tiger for her dog. Total lie. Joyce Carol Oates wrote a book called Blonde, based loosely on Marilyn, and she opened the book with this fake story, which only reinforced the lie. This morning that we're talking about, Marilyn got deliveries of furniture. She got deliveries of plants. She had some empty spots in the house because the furniture still hadn't come, but it's not because she was despondent and lost interest. She was mad because her taken forever for her Mexican furniture to show up. Saturday afternoon, Eunice told Jeffries that she'd just been fired and that she had to be gone, packed up and gone by the end of the day, and Jeffries agreed to help her pack. And he asked Eunice, was he fired too? And she said, you asked Marilyn. Pat Newcomb confirmed that Marilyn could not stand Eunice, and she finally took control of the situation. Marilyn did. Eunice called Greenson to tell him, and he told Marilyn Monroe to pay her the equivalent of $8,179 a month. He got her on Marilyn's payroll, and this is just exploitation. This is insanity. She didn't even do the shopping. Why was she there? Well, she was there to spy for Greenson. Marilyn had called New York to replace Eunice that same day, to replace her with Hattie, who lived in her New York apartment, who could come to LA and then live in the guest house and replace Eunice. That same afternoon, a mechanic dropped off Eunice's car. He said that he could see that Marilyn was there. She looked like she'd been crying. She looked tired. Now, we're on chapter 43. Marilyn was angry and terrified. August 4th, between 3 and 4-ish in the afternoon, the AG came to her house and showed up uninvited. He came on purpose uninvited to confront her and to frighten her. He was seen arriving at the studio in a helicopter. So like he flew from the ranch, 47-minute trip from Gilroy, flew to LA, took a helicopter to avoid the traffic to the Fox studio, and then got into Peter Lawford's car and drove to Marilyn's. Chief William Parker of the LAPD said that he was in LA. The AG was in LA that day. The commute would only have taken a couple of hours. I already described it. He was in LA this Saturday. Marilyn died. And this has been confirmed. There's a list of people, I won't belabor it, but there's a whole list of cops and people in charge who knew that he was there. Because security, they had to know. This was investigated by several reporters and confirmed. And by Sam Yorty, the mayor then of Los Angeles. LA kept tabs on famous people. You know, they couldn't risk something bad happening. The head of the FBI, the agent in charge of FBI in LA, wrote to Washington, D.C. that he often loaned his car to the AG to go to see Marilyn Monroe. And this is confirmed by the FBI agent's son and daughter, who would be without a car for the day because the AG was using it to go visit Marilyn Monroe. Anyway, he shows up at her house and she was absolutely shocked. She was dirty from working in the yard. She wasn't groomed. She was getting ready to take a shower. She was in a robe. She had no makeup on. Peter Lawford was with him. He wanted to catch her off guard. It was a power play. He wanted to intimidate her and coerce her. He was a bully. He was invading her privacy, invading her space. She had told people already she was no longer sleeping with either of them. She had resolved no more married men. Too complicated. Hoover had put pressure on the older brother, and he pressured the younger brother to end everything. This was in July. And Marilyn took it in stride. She was like, okay. She was busy. She was busy with her career. She was busy with modeling. She was busy with her house. All these new projects, all these clothes fittings. And I mean, she just had it all going on. And she was not pining away for lost love. It was probably her rebelliousness that most alarmed the brothers. It was like she didn't care, which was kind of a red flag for them. She was no shrinking violet. She had stood up to her studio, to Daryl Zanuck, to other studio big shots. They knew she was a woman of strength and resolve. They saw this in her, and it was a threat. Sinatra, now she didn't make a threat. They just could see the writing on the wall. Sinatra's best friend, when dining in 2021, said that Marilyn didn't understand why they cut her off. I mean, she was offended. She wasn't heartbroken. She was like pissed. She stopped sleeping with them. They cut her off. She didn't get that. She thought that they had friendship. And she put her neck on the line with Fox for the thing at Madison Square Garden, and they were more than willing to jettison her at a moment's notice. It really hurt her feelings. It's not like she was in love with him, but she had looked up to him and respected him. This is the older brother. And because of who he was and the position he had. But there was only so far she would go. She had ethics and morals. She knew they had families. And she probably fooled around a little bit with the younger brother to kind of dig at the older brother for being so callous and cutting her off so coldly. But at the same time, it wasn't from any kind of heartache. It was like, two can play this game. And there was no real love lost. It was more, I'm offended that you would be so callous to a friend. She assumed they had a friendship, but you're dealing with psychopaths. So, anyway, people have written in books that she cried and all that stuff, but this is just stories. This is not true. So the AG arrives at her house, and he gave Eunice and Jeffries change. This is so arrogant. Gave them change and said, go buy yourself some Cokes. In other words, get out of the house. Otash. Now, this is the guy, the private eye, who's collecting secret recordings. Otash heard this angry confrontation on the tapes. And he said that he could tell that the AG was physical and menacing. He'd been furious. He'd been playing touch football with the family right before this. Otash had seen and heard this. Other people had seen and heard this. Ethel was 6 months pregnant, and the whole family was playing touch football, and she dropped the football, and he just turned on her like, like a Wolverine. So he says to Marilyn, "Where's your diary? Where the hell is it? It's important to the family. Where is it?" And then you could hear on the tapes the sounds of a search. And he was screeching at her. And she was shouting at him to get out. After her death, Lawford got Otash to go to her house and collect and destroy all the evidence that confirmed she had any connection at all to the brothers or the family. Hoover had proof that in 1963, the AG paid off a woman $500,000 to hush about her relationship with his older brother. So they weren't above that. He told Marilyn, quote, "I'll make any arrangements you want. In other words, I'll buy it off of you." Her diary. This is the AG says to her on the tape. And Hoover says that he liked to needle the AG and the older brother with blackmailable information. Her diary was sacrosanct to her. She refused, and this may have cost her her life. They feared not that she was going to do a press conference. They feared that her diary would fall into the wrong hands, and it would be used by other parties against them. And that's strong potential, actually, of being, this is like the hot evidence that might fall into the wrong hands. It actually did happen to Judith Campbell, who'd had the affair with the older brother. And also it happened to May Lawford, Peter's mother, her diaries. Let's see what I underlined here. Peter Lawford's own mother, who was planning to write a book that spilled the beans on the family from Boston, had her own apartment in West Los Angeles broken into for the third time and ransacked only the night before Marilyn's death. And this is confirmed by a police report filed at the time. In trying to retrieve anything that linked the two brothers to the sexy actress, the AG was following much the same strategy as when he tried to erase the trail that connected his family to the mafia. There are patterns of conduct that offer clues to what likely transpired between them, the brothers, and Monroe. There's a false version of Saturday's Afternoon that's put out by author C.D. Heyman, and it includes Marilyn Monroe lunging at the AG with a kitchen knife. This is just nonsense. After Patricia Lawford divorced him, old Joe bankrolled Peter Lawford's production company to the tune of $7 million. And so the question is, he's now divorced from the family. Why would they do that? Well, sweeten the deal, keep him quiet. Eyewitnesses, and this is interesting, totally impartial people. She had her one side of her house was very close to the neighbors. They had a 2-story house and a deck and stuff, and they saw. Okay, so these two guests of her next door neighbors saw the AG arrive with another man, Lawford, and they saw Jeffries and Eunice leave. Then they saw a third guy show up carrying a bag, and they assumed it was a doctor. And it wasn't Greenson. He came later. This third guy had been waiting in the car. They saw all this. He'd been waiting in the car. And the AG had come out and gotten him after Eunice and Jeffries left. Did he bring a doctor with him to calm her down so he could search the apartment? Of course, the cops dismissed this eyewitness information. They wanted to hear nothing about it. They never talked to Jeffries. They never talked to Pat Newcomb either. Crime reporter Floribel Muir claimed that Engelberg came. So it's this crazy doctor with the weird library. He came and gave her an injection, supposedly for her cold. She didn't have a cold. There was never a bill. What was that about? Well, the implication is she was sedated. Many years later, the doctor admitted that he had been in touch with Marilyn Monroe earlier in the evening on the phone. And he had never mentioned this before originally, but later, years later, he did. That she was happy and mentally in a good state. Nobody said she had a cold. She did not have a cold. They did find Nembutal in her liver. Why were the brothers so afraid of her? Was it because she was such a big star, so famous, everything she did was noticed? They had many girlfriends, many liaisons. After they left, she called Sidney Guillerout and said that the AG got physical with her and terrified her. That he was known to get into heated public confrontations. This was not anything unique. Ted Sorensen, a close aide to and longtime speechwriter for the older brother, once described the younger brother's character as, quote, militant, aggressive, intolerant, opinionated, somewhat shallow in his convictions, more like his father than his brother. He left her home after their confrontation that day, but he wasn't giving up, and he would return. Jeffries and Eunice returned. Marilyn was hysterical. She looked awful. She was angry, and she looked scared. Where was Pat Newcomb in all of this? Had she stayed at the house even though she'd been fired? Did she witness all this? It's not mentioned. Did she join in and take sides? If she did, she probably took his side. And Marilyn had fired Greenson and fired Pat. But Pat stayed. And no details about any of this ever came out, so we don't know. Guillerout was a longtime friend and confidant, and later her pallbearer. That's really sad. After the AG left, she called him and Guillerout and told him about the visit. Was this to get it all on the record because she knew she was being taped? She told me she'd had an affair with him and the older brother too, and that everything had gone wrong. Now she was afraid, and she felt she was in terrible danger. The AG said, if you threaten me, Marilyn, there's more than one way to keep you quiet. A close friend of Sidney's said that the first draft of his book told more. He let his close friend read it, but that he got cold feet because of being gay, and it was not a public thing at the time he wrote the book. And he'd been threatened by the family. He hated them, and he adored Marilyn, and he took it out of the book because they threatened him. Now we have the case of Mary Meyer, and this is such a strange story. She was the former wife of CIA agent Cord Meyer, and that name ought to ring a bell because he was all up in the 70s Watergate stuff. She had an affair with the older brother, and he told people that he loved her and that he was leaving the White House when his term was up, and that he would then divorce Jackie for Mary. He told people this. This is his own words. There are documents and eyewitnesses that attest to this. There was a 4-page love letter from him to her saying this that was auctioned in 2016, publicly auctioned, could be read, sold for $89,000. October 12th of 1964, Mary went for a walk on a canal towpath in Georgetown where she lived. A 24-year-old tow truck driver driving by heard a scream. Somebody help me. And he stopped, and he saw a woman struggling with a man. Then he heard 2 shots. He finally was able to reach her because it was across plants and down an embankment. And he finally reached the scene. He saw a black man leaning over her body, put something in his pocket, and calmly walked off. She had fought and was dragged 25 feet off of the path and was killed, execution style, shot in the head, looked very much like a professional hit. She had 2 wounds, one in the shoulder, one in her head, both contact wounds. The coroner said, quote, "This was a highly trained killer. Neat accuracy. A professional assassin did this. Whoever did it intended to kill her." But there was no obvious motive. She had no ID, but her body drew a huge crowd of guys in suits, 17 to be exact, and cops in uniforms. But who were they? This was not a normal response to even a murder in Georgetown. The cops did not secure the area. The crime scene was compromised. Evidence from it was compromised. An AP reporter took photos of this crowd. This is documented. And asked the question, who are these guys? It's very like a huge crowd of suits immediately congregated, the huge crowd of suits that immediately congregated outside Marilyn Monroe's house when she died, before the police were called. An identical swarm of men, described in both cases as a swarm of men. In 1 hour after this event, a 25-year-old black father of 5, yikes, Ray Crump Jr. was arrested. He was far smaller than the man described by the eyewitnesses. He was terrified and sobbing. Apparently he had been fishing and he was wet. He had been drinking beer and he'd fallen asleep. He dropped his pole when he fell asleep and startled him awake, and he went into the river to get it and he was all wet. He said, "I almost got shot myself." He was terrified because he saw what happened. And he said, "I don't really know what happened." You know, he heard the gunshots and saw what had happened, but he didn't really know how the whole thing had unfolded. But yeah, he was seen there because he went to the sound of the shots, I guess. But turns out the real story, now there's always a real story, he wasn't really fishing. He was there to meet a woman for a hookup. And they did sit there and drink, and he did fall asleep. But the woman had left by the time he woke up. And he slipped when he was leaving, and he fell in the water, and he was freaked out because he didn't know how to swim. And he did lose his cap and his coat in the water, and actually they did find it. The police found it later floating down the river. But the woman refused to testify on his behalf because she was afraid of her husband. So Crump, this poor guy, was indicted by a grand jury on first-degree murder before there was even a coroner's inquest. He was indicted. He was denied a preliminary hearing, which is completely unusual. And because they denied him this preliminary hearing, they were able to hide the FBI lab report. The lab report, which said there was no link between him and the crime. There was no physical evidence. No victim's blood, no trace powder, no fingerprints, no fibers, no hair. So this was all kept from the defense. The cops told the media, this is an open and shut case. Total lie. Crump never before had been seen with a gun. The gun was never found. A Lieutenant William Mitchell, a star witness, said he saw Crump jogging with Mary Meyer. And the narrative made no sense at all. The way that he told the story about the timing and stuff was completely flawed. It didn't go along with what really happened. He never mentioned hearing the screams that everybody else heard. And this Lieutenant William Mitchell, the star witness, was linked later to U.S. intelligence. He worked for Georgetown University. That was his claim. Well, what's so interesting, there's no evidence to this claim. that he was ever employed there. And apparently, this is a claim often a front job that was used by CIA. He disappeared, completely disappeared. From the, forever disappeared. The Washington Post editor, Bill Bradley, he was Mary Pinchot Meyer's brother-in-law. A top CIA agent called him hours before she was identified by the cops to tell her that she'd been shot. The tow truck driver never identified Crump. All of this information, it was blocked in court. The information about Mary and the connections to the CIA, all of it was blocked, and Bradley, all blocked in court. It was as if she existed only on the towpath on the day that she was murdered. No backstory whatsoever. Bradley withheld testimony of Mary's diary with details of her affair with the older brother. He got his hands on it. He lied under oath about it. In 1995, before he revealed that he had caught a CIA counterintelligence chief, and this guy, it pops up everywhere, James Jesus Angleton. He was caught breaking into Mary's home the night of her murder, and then caught breaking into her studio 2 more times and ransacked all of them in search of her diary. Bradley said the fact the CIA's most controversial counterintelligence specialist had been caught in the act of breaking and entering and looking for her diary was not something that was appropriate for public disclosure. Oh, okay. Her best friend was in Japan and said Mary had told her that if anything ever happened to her, that her best friend had to get her hands on her private diary and keep it private from the public. Bradley was a hypocrite. He said people have the right to know, about Watergate, but people don't have the right to know about her diary. He withheld evidence in a murder case that could have exonerated an innocent man who could have gotten the death penalty if he had been convicted. These are extremes that were taken to protect the reputation of the brothers. Dovey Roundtree, in 2018, at the age of 104, was deeply unsettled by the information about Bradley and Angleton and the diary. And she had been one of the lawyers. Alfred Hartman, the prosecutor, in 1991, was said that having knowledge about Mary and her connection to the older brother could have changed everything that happened, as far as these deaths. And the detective was upset. The main detective didn't know any of this either. So this guy is being charged with the murder he didn't commit because the editor of the Washington Post, who's related to her by marriage, knows that the CIA broke into her house to get her diary, knows there was secret evidence, is appalled by some of the evidence that he found out. And it's all kept secret, despite the fact that this guy might get the death penalty. Well, he went to trial. He was tried, fully tried, and he was acquitted. Bradley said that he got his hands on the diary, he burned it, but his wife said that before Angleton sneaked it to Bradley, he broke in, CIA agent, broke in, stole Mary's diary, read it, and before he gave it to the editor of the Washington Post, he pulled a bunch of pages out of it and kept it. And it did tell about her affair. Bradley claimed that he was not aware of a romance. P.S. He was a close friend of the older brothers. So, question, was the CIA trying to protect the AG? He was running, at the time he wasn't the AG, but that's my name for him. He was running for Senate. Were they trying to protect him? Of course, the older brother was dead. Were they trying to protect the younger brother, or were they trying to protect the younger brother, the one of another death fame that we covered that book too? Nina Burley wrote a book called A Very Private Woman about Mary. She said Mary thought that people were breaking into her house and going through her things, and that her phone was wiretapped by the CIA. Now, Angleton was also involved in surveillance of Marilyn Monroe. His career ended abruptly, and he was an example of how not to conduct counterintelligence. They finally was revealed about what a criminal he really was, about the laws that he broke and the privacy that he broke. And because of his bad behavior, I guess, his unprofessionalism, his criminality, it changed intelligence in the American political system. Or did it? So the CIA, this is going to come as a huge shock to everybody, I'm sure. The CIA has a checkered history. It withheld, for example, the Warren Report information, thereby perverting justice. When that report came out in 1964, Mary Meyer confronted her husband, Cord, her ex-husband, and she confronted him about the untruths in it, and she was murdered just several days later, same week. Did the AG get the CIA to shut Marilyn Monroe up? Or did they do it on their own? That's anybody's guess who was involved in all of this. This is just unreal. So, Ralph Roberts had bought Marilyn a small red diary in New York City, and she wrote in it regularly. And this has been verified by a number of people who saw her writing in it, and it has completely disappeared. Marilyn often was seen taking notes on political and global information from the AG. He saw her doing it. Ralph said that Marilyn was a poor speller, and she was such a poor speller that people accused her of being illiterate, and she really wasn't illiterate. She was really, really well read. She was just a poor speller. Einstein was also a bad speller in 2 languages, English and German. Churchill was a bad speller. Benjamin Franklin, W.B. Yeats, John Irving, Agatha Christie, Leonardo da Vinci, and JFK were all bad spellers, yet each of these individuals, including Marilyn, each was an intelligent person. Her stand her bedstand is confirmed that she had stacks of notebooks that she kept. Could have held explosive information. We don't know. Her writing reveals that she was contemplative, poetic, reflective. There's a book called Fragments, Poems, Intimate Notes, and Letters by Marilyn Monroe that was edited by Booktel and Comment, the names of the people who edited it. She felt driven to expose herself in writing. She really felt the urge to write. The hugely dangerous myth is that she planned a press conference. There's no such, it's not true, absolutely untrue, and this may have gotten her killed. It was perpetuated by 2 cons, Bob Statzer and Jean Carmen. They had no proof. Then the guy Anthony Summers, published their stories, and this is all just a gross distortion of the real history. She had a well-established history of the utmost discretion. We've talked about that before. She had no history of vengefulness. She also knew that if she spoke out publicly against the 2 brothers, she would only harm herself in her own career, because their reputations, their image was so carefully nurtured and manipulated that she would only make herself look bad, because people would just assume, that she was the one at fault. But they knew her diary was radioactive if it got in the wrong hands. She called gossiping about her exes indelicate. She would say nothing bad about them. She claimed to still love everyone that she'd ever loved. She had no bitterness, no sense of blame, no criticism. She had regrets, but no rancor. Her self-appointed biographer, Bob Slatzer, who really was just full of it, wrote in his book in 74 and even claimed that he married her in 52. She happened to be in Mexico with a bunch of other people the day he claimed they got married. Whitey Snyder, her close friend, said, I never heard her say a vindictive word. To think that she'd have a press conference is just laughable. She was skilled at deflecting unwanted questions about her private life from the press. Sinatra said she'd never have spilled about the brothers. She still had feelings for them. You know, she didn't just cut people off like that. Well, that's the end of this chapter, and I think we'll be done for today. I hope you enjoyed this. This was number 15. And we'll be back. We're coming into the home stretch. And I can just tell you that this story becomes something worthy of a movie in and of itself. It is unbelievable. And I'm going to be getting in touch with the author, Larry Jordan, and I think he's agreed to come. I hope so. I'm assuming he still will. And I'm really excited to talk about him. I've been collecting questions here for weeks now about this book. And if you guys have questions, please send them to me, and I will absolutely pursue them. And this has changed my opinion about her. I didn't have much of an opinion. I didn't think about her much, quite frankly. The typical blonde airhead, controversy about her death I didn't know and I didn't care. This has completely changed my views and my opinion. So I hope you're enjoying this, and I really appreciate you watching. I appreciate all of my subscribers who have stayed. There's kind of been a little bit of a hemorrhaging of subscribers since I changed my channel a little bit. And just to let you all know, I'm still doing the same things I've always done. Hint, hint, hint. Behind the paywall on Substack, and sometimes in front of the paywall on Substack, just in the interests of discretion. And got together with Deborah Lupien the other day, and we're going to be doing it again. We have more to reveal, and some of the true crime cases that we've covered, that I've covered here on YouTube, she and I have gone over, and all I can say is, oh my God. So I hope everyone's having a lovely Christmas. I had a lovely time. My granddaughters did my nails for me. Aren't they lovely? And at some point this week, behind the paywall, it has to be behind the paywall, as you would find out when you see what it is. One of my granddaughters made me a gift that is the epic Christmas gift of all times. So, and I'm not talking about a kid's drawing or a piece of art. This is truly epic. So, little tantalizing. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice, cozy, quiet, safe, and happy with your families or your friends or with your own best company for the next few days. And Merry Christmas, Nolagona, Slangafoil, Slancha.